Hello, everybody. It's Marci from wavesofcommunication.com. Welcome to another episode of the Language Facilitation Helpline podcast, and thank you for tuning in today. The fastest results come when you enjoy the process of language facilitation. Welcome, everybody, to another spotlight interview here on the Waves of Communication channel. This is Alexi, we're talking today about ear fluid. And I know a lot of you out there are dealing with this situation, but Alexi comes to this particular problem with a unique perspective.
Well, thanks for having me on here, Marci. My name is Dr. Alexi Silance. I am an audiologist and a integrative and natural medicine practitioner, I guess. And I'm just thrilled to be here because I think the ear fluid is such a big part of childhood dilemmas and illnesses and speech delays growing up.
Yes, and I know that you kind of have shifted in your career sort of away from full-time audiology into a more overall wellness perspective in what you do in your business. And that came from a personal situation that happened in your life, didn't it?
Absolutely. So I had lupus after my second son was born, and then I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all sorts of things, and my health just plummeted. The stress it caused in my family actually ruined my marriage, and it just really helped me understand how important our lifestyle and diet and nutrition and the people around us are as far as really giving us good health. And so I was able to restore my health. And through that, I was much more aware of my own patients' health conditions. Oftentimes, I might see someone who was 100 that could run circles around someone who was 45. And so what's going on? Why are there all these differences in our bodies? And so I just wanted to make much more of an impact than what I could do in audiology alone. And so I've just broadened my knowledge and really have jumped feet first into this integrative and natural medicine. And it allows me to help the ears as well. So it's not.
Yeah. And so that's what we really want to focus on today, because on the channel, we've talked a lot about ear fluid. It's not a secret that I believe it is the number one physiological blockage to spoken language. I know that kids are being diagnosed with other things, and there, of course, are kids that are born with real physiological problems. And so many of these, even these physiological problems, like genetic syndromes and things like that, often come with ear-related issues, physical ear-related issues. And some of them are neurological and things like that. And that's where the neuroplasticity comes in. But with the overall health and wellness of the child, because we see kids that are going to preschools, we see kids that are engaging just out in the world, getting viruses and colds, and the little ones especially are messy with their hands and all, hands in their mouth and touching other things and all the germs that are sharing and stuff. And many of these kids, it doesn't have to be germs, it can be allergies, it can be lots and lots of different things that is the root cause of this ear fluid. And a lot of people are so focused on getting rid of it, right? How do we eliminate this ear fluid that they forget to focus on what potentially could be generating it in the first time. So I want to actually kind of talk about both of those things with you. We'll talk about remedies to eliminate it because both of them are important, right?
Absolutely.
We want to keep it from coming back. So if you potentially, as an audiologist, would see kids who are coming to you in those key ranges, we're talking about 18 months till about 3 or 4 years old, until they start to grow and be able to eliminate this stuff on their own. And they're still collecting it and still developing, and chronic. We're talking about the kids that come and go, they keep it over and over and over. What kinds of wellness issues are you seeing? Because there could be a big variety, but I know that you see patterns. That's why you're here, because you see a lot of these kids, and what are the kinds of things that you see when you look at them holistically?
So the first thing I take a look at is their diet. A lot of sugar, high carby foods will create an inflammation response in the body. And you may have heard of candida or yeast infections. And the body responds to those in a state of inflammation, and that produces extra mucus and fluid. And that will result in just blockages through the eustachian tube. Especially when it is yeast, it gets thicker, and that's when we start to get the really thick fluid inside the middle ear. That even if the doctor does a myringotomy and puts a tube in, it's not really going anywhere because it's so thick.
Yeah.
So we really want to change the diet. And I know it's difficult. It's great. We want to make our kids feel happy and give them ice cream and candy and all of this stuff. But you're doing no favors to your child to do that because it affects their whole body. But their ears at that age are going to be one of the most predominant areas that is impacted by a poor diet.
The fuelers for this inflammation are sugar,
So dairy can be very inflammatory.
Okay.
Sugar's really big. Gluten for a lot of people. So a lot of pastas and breads, things like that have a lot of yeast in them, and that will create that issue. So for adults, we tend to think of yeast problems more as like athlete's foot or a yeast infection down there. Sometimes thrush. But if your child has cases of thrush, I can almost guarantee that they have fluid buildup in their eustachian tube. So that's
So
definitely
look
something you
for
want to look
those
at.
symptoms. Look for symptoms that were related to inflammation. Anytime you have inflammation, because remember, the skin is also an organ, so you'll see inflammation and
Rashes,
rashes.
whiteness on the tongue, any kind of weird discharges anywhere in the body. If they have a lot of eye crusties in the morning, that too can sometimes indicate it. If they're itching in their ears, or you see a lot of dry skin, or
Yeah.
wax, a big part of why we produce a lot of wax, especially some kids, is due to the diet. So change the diet. Guess what? The wax miraculously starts to go away.
Now, do you recommend that parents go cold turkey and eliminate these things? Um, because I'm telling I mean, you were laughing because I can see parents going, all right, I got to never give my kid any ice cream ever. And especially if ice cream was a big part of your life. And one point, you got here somehow. Your kid loves this stuff, right?
Mhm.
And so, what do you suggest as far as ideas? Do they have to quit it all?
So I look at the body as sort of like a garden. Everything has to be in balance. And if you feed too much of one thing, it's going to throw off that balance. If you don't have enough of something else, that throws off the balance. So on occasion, yes, I get it. Kids are going to go to parties and they're going to be around their friends. So the more able that you are to control it at home, the more that they can sort of let loose when they're in situations that are a little bit different. I don't want to deprive kids of all of this stuff. Holistically, do I think it's good for you? No. Am I guilty of eating ice cream? I think I had some last night.
Right, there you go.
But,
Because we all
it's
admit,
going to happen.
if the parents are in control over what they're feeding the kids, then they can be not very intuitive in this process. They can be very by the book. That's why I want to really remind everybody that this is trial and error, a lot of trial and error. And so consistency is going to show you the patterns.
Absolutely.
If you give your kid, even it could be the time of day that you give them, how much you eat them, the brand you give them. And then the other thing I wanted to throw into this is, what about GMOs and preservatives and things like that?
Very inflammatory. So some of the worst things that you could give your kids are GMOs. So when possible, and I know it's expensive, non-GMO, pesticide-free, antibiotic-free is really important.
And
If
that you
you as a
can go cold turkey. You can, as much as possible. I know it's in almost everything. Corn syrup, we're like made of it practically. Unless you choose to eat things that aren't processed, and
Right.
everything's processed. So here's some ideas. Let me just talk about this diet change from a language facilitation perspective for a little bit. When we talk about things like diet change or limiting how much we want, making changes in diets, it's very important that you involve the child in this process. You just don't decide because you watch this video, I'm never going to give my kid ice cream anymore. It has to be a mutual decision. So your child understands why ice cream doesn't arrive anymore. They have to understand that it's making them feel sick. They don't, because remember, they could be used to these symptoms. They don't care that their ears are full of fluid. They care more about eating their ice cream. But you, as the grown up, as the adult, are the one here to take responsibility for this, where and you can let the child join you. It's just like when we have parents that have chronic environmental allergies and they've got to give their kids nasal things and whatever to keep the ear fluid out. They explain to their kids that the nasal spray keeps their ears clear because, like you said, if they're pulling on their ear or they've got thrush or these are symptoms that are uncomfortable. They don't want to continue to experience them. They have trouble sleeping. They have trouble breathing. All these things happen. Talk about those symptoms and how these foods cause the symptoms. The ice cream makes you snore at night. The ice cream makes you, whatever they're feeling, and associate, because they show you their symptoms. That's how you know they're having an issue in the first place, is through their symptoms. Okay, so
the kids are smart enough, right, to know exactly what you're telling them. So even though they may be very young, intuitively they understand. And as you start to rewire their brains at that age, it gets easier as they get older.
Cause and effect, and you start the habits early. So you decide, and again, it can't necessarily be cold turkey. You can degrade these things out of your life, and you have to balance. So you have to, if it's sweet stuff that your child loves, that's ice cream or candies or cakes or something, you got to look at the sweet fruits. You got to look at the sweet things that you can add, not artificial sweeteners, but other things that are naturally good. If your child likes crunchy chips, you got to introduce the carrots and the celery and those kinds of things so that they feel the crunch, because they're missing whatever it is about that food that they crave, right? They will miss it. And remember, addictions and these things that happen, the sugar and the gluten and the yeast that gets in our body, that is what messes with our brains too. It makes us want more of it. And then that's why the kid who will, even adults, right? We make bad choices because our brain overcomes our subconscious, what we know is right for us. So that's where we're starting with these habits, is letting kids know what's good for them. This is good for you. Don't talk about so much what's bad for them. We want to stop focusing on that.
Right. Always focus on the positive. You want to feel better. You want to look better. You want to have more energy.
Hear better, see better, go to class better, play with your friends, whatever's important to the child. Because we were talking about this before we started. If you've got, a person who comes into the audiology office because their doctor said you need to go get a hearing aid, and they show up with sort of a grumpy face, like, I don't want to wear hearing aids. Hearing aids make me look, they've got some idea that that's not a good thing for them. They're going to never use it. If they take it, they'll return it, or they'll stick it in the drawer. They never want to pay all the money for it. They'll complain the whole time about the process of healing. You don't want to be like this. You don't want to deny what is helpful to you because of your ego or other things you want instead. So diet is a good place to start. What other kinds of things besides diet contribute to ear fluid?
So breathing. And you'll see a lot of children breathe with their mouth open, especially if their ears are plugged. They'll just hang with their mouth open, and that changes facial structure. It also, when you breathe through your nose, it creates nitric oxide, which is antimicrobial, antibacterial, antiviral. And so that helps to get rid of any underlying infections. So they'll be healthier in general. They'll have less respiratory infections, and they don't feel so congested.
This is just the difference between breathing from your nose and breathing from your mouth.
Huge difference between the two.
I never knew this, Alexi.
I know.
So you can work with your child on nose breathing, just nose breathing, that will help them literally their brain feels better, their body feels better.
Yep. So you're going to get more energy. When you breathe through the mouth, the breath is very shallow when it's in the upper chest. And so what happens is you're not filling the lungs in down to the diaphragm. So you're not getting the oxygen that you need to your tissues. So cognition is delayed generally. Even as adults, we may have more brain fog from that. Again, the nitric oxide, so it helps to sterilize the whole respiratory tract. So it helps reduce chances of illness. So
Yeah, get
cold,
rid of those
allergies.
viruses. Yes.
Okay. So if your child snores at night, and I know this sounds crazy, but a lot of times you can get little tape that goes over the mouth and it keeps it pinched closed at night. And that way they breathe through their nose. And eventually, over time, that opens up the whole pathway. So it's much more easy. And as a simple thing that
Such
you
an
can do.
easy, so simple. That's exactly what I was going to say. So simple that you can work on breathing with your kid through their nose. And you just show them, do it in the mirror side by side with them.
Mhm,
Keep your mouth closed. Show them that your mouth is closed. Show them
right,
that your nose is big. And then the other thing is if they can't do it, if they're so congested that they can't, this is an opportunity for you to talk about that congestion, right? Oh no, your nose is all full of goo. This is because we ate the stuff or we did the thing or
right.
whatever, all
Yep.
that stuff. And so even if your child is not, if it's not diet, if it is environment, like your child's allergic to pollen or whatever
Mhm,
around them, because it's these allergies that are causing the inflammation and all that stuff, this is how you help them. The trees are blooming. It's time for us to breathe with our nose. And remember, it's sort of the opposite of what you get into the habit. If you've got congestion,
right.
you sort of develop that natural open mouth
Exactly. And
posture,
you
we
can
call
tell
it.
by looking at someone, they're going to look very
While
congested
they're
through
looking
their
at their phone
sinuses.
or whatever, they're like, they see that droopy face. Yeah,
And it
yeah.
changes the arch in the mouth, the palate, which is critical for talking.
Yes.
And then it also causes dental issues. So if you're not breathing nasally and you're hanging your mouth open, your tongue is not fitting properly into the mandible. And then your teeth start to close in, which is why we take the wisdom teeth out later, which is its own sense of it, own issue.
Wow.
But
And another reason with all the stuff flowing around in the air, it doesn't matter, especially if your child's seasonally allergy, they're sucking it all into their
exactly,
mouth.
exactly.
Wow.
So one thing easy they can do to help with some of that congestion, which will also help moving some of that fluid, is have your child take a breath in, a breath out through their nose, pinch their nose shut, and then shake their head up and down while they're holding their breath. Okay. And you don't want to hold it like you're,
Yeah.
but just
Take a deep
exhale
breath.
and then
Yeah,
don't
let a normal breath.
inhale.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, when you shake your head and pinch your nose shut, you may need to repeat it 5 or 6 times, but it will open up the nasal passageways and it clears the eustachian tube and everything out.
Wow.
So
So if
simple.
your child is doing that, if you have that kind of congestion, you can kind of walk them through it. Like if you put your hand on the back of their head and the front, just kind of guiding them to
You
move.
got
So
it.
you really, that inhaled air though is really important, right? Because it's got all that nitrous oxide in there that you're literally moving around in your head.
Mhm.
Think about that. It's sort of like a chiropractic treatment for your sinuses,
Yeah.
right? You're adjusting that space. It's sinus space in there, and you're putting that better
Right.
gas that you created in your nose up into that area to target those things. And this is how superficial sorts of interventions can take place at the cellular level, right? Can cause change at the cellular level, is what I should say.
Absolutely. Part of the biggest component that we need for health is oxygen into our cells. And if you're not breathing properly and deeply, and so a lot of us, when we go to the doctors and they tell us to breathe deep, we go, and it's still all up here. No, it needs to go
Yeah,
down into your
belly, move your
diaphragm.
belly out. Yeah, push your belly out. Yeah.
And so just getting that oxygen into the cells is what helps the cells have energy to have the body function the way it should.
So
So
those
you
are the
might have heard of
targets. those are the targets for your breathing. Using your nose, like in through the nose, out through the mouth, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then making your belly blow
Go
out. Not
out.
your shoulders rise, but your belly blow out so that the air is getting all the way down, gets all the way to the deep of your lungs. And then when your mouth is closed during that time, you have that whatever. I love
I love
these.
that. And if you want to have your child practice that breathing, sometimes have them lay on the ground and put a book, if they're old enough, put a book on their belly so that they can watch it come up and down. And then they know they're breathing in through the right area. It
Yeah,
takes
it's almost
practice.
impossible to avoid diaphragmatic breathing when you're laying flat on your back. So
Mhm.
that is, you can help them experience it, even if you put your hand on their belly and
Exactly.
show them how your hand is moving up and down. Make my hand, blow my hand out, right? Because then they'll do it, and you'll see the difference between them pushing it out with their stomach. They can't do it. They have
Right.
to breathe the air in to make your hand move. So these little tricks are going to help you go. So this is where prevention, like I would recommend every single parent, even if your kid doesn't have ear fluid, this kind of breathing work, not only does it help your child's brain activate the neuroplasticity that otherwise you're affecting through their language models and all the other stuff you're doing, movement and all that other stuff, but it really will help you connect with this kid because you're breathing at the same time. You're connected, you're focused on the breath, and
Yep.
you're intentionally creating healing and wellness together as a group just by breathing together. And then if your child will allow you to take them the step further to slosh that ear fluid around and work it around, I know I talk a lot on my channel about movement and how, if these kids are chewing on their shirts or they're wanting crunchy things or they're tugging on their ears,
It's
that
trying
they
to open
they
that.
tend to be climbing and jumping or going for the trampolines and things like that. Talk about how movement affects ear fluid.
So the lymphatic system is the most important underrated system in the body. And if we're not active in moving, the lymph system becomes very stagnant. And our whole immune regulation is based off of our lymph system. So the way that, if you're moving and jumping and you're getting that lymph to move, then all the toxins and the things that make us sick that then cause the ear fluid will get filtered through the liver and be detoxed out of the body. So it really is important. I love trampolines. I love jumping. Um, any kind of activities that the kids are doing. Absolutely. This is why physical activity is critical as far as that's concerned. The other thing I like to do with the lymph system is if there is fluid, I'll take my fingers and gently push. So I start behind the ears and
Okay.
come down the neck and then forward into the clavicle because your lymph system drains right into the clavicle. And then I go a little bit closer up and then go in and then the front of the neck and go in and then the nape of the neck and always go into the clavicle. So you're going to pull it down to your shoulder blades and then into the clavicle.
Love
And if
that.
you do that every day and even go out with your sinuses out from the sinuses, down the sides of the ear and all the way in and then to the clavicle.
Yeah, and you can almost envision while you're doing that, the fluid is draining, it's draining all down, and that lymphatic, it goes down into your bladder, so you pee it out is what happens ultimately. And so this is super important, and what we think, because it's easy to see the idea of how if you jump around, you can move that ear fluid out. If you've ever gone swimming and you've got ear fluid in the outer ear, if you jump up and down, it will lodge it out.
Exactly.
But the reason it gets stuck in there is because it's like a little vacuum. It's a
Mhm.
very tiny little space. And as soon as you get fluid into a tiny little space, especially if
Like
one
the
end, it's got a
suction.
hole at the bottom of it, it's going to, gravity works, it's going to head into that dip or those, every little valley or crevice or whatever that's in your sinuses, all that soft tissue, it's inflamed, it's mucousy, it's all just collecting in
Right.
there and staying in there, and that lymphatic stuff drains it all out. Jumping might loosen it up and get things moving, but this drainage is super important, I think, especially if you've got a chronic situation
Mhm.
going on where right now there's fluid. And will this lymphatic movement help with the thickening of it? Like, how do we get that stuff to thin out? Is it possible? Is that just back to diet again?
It's back to diet. hmm Over
Okay.
time, it will, because the ear will continue to produce moisture. Moisture and mucus is normal. It's a protective mechanism. Again, it's about balance. And so when it goes out of balance, that's when it becomes too thick or builds up. If
Okay.
we don't have enough, then it becomes dry and irritated, and then it becomes inflamed. And then eventually you're just going to go back and have
Yeah.
fluid again because of that inflammation. So we
Yeah.
always want there to be moisture. So, take a look at your environment at home, you know, and that's the other thing that is important is, what is the environment like at home? Is there mold toxicity? Are
Dust.
they dust? All of these allergens are really impactful, or even mercury is really important. And a lot of moms don't realize this, but when you're pregnant, if you have any fillings, amalgam fillings or silver fillings in your teeth, that mercury is passed from you down into the baby before they're even born. That heavy metal toxicity is going to have them start life with already an astronomical load of inflammation. So it's something to be really cognizant of so that you can help to remove some of those toxins from their bodies.
Yeah, and that would be through supplements and things like that that you can work with
And at
professionals.
that
And that,
age, I'd be, a little bit careful, but yes, you can give them some
yeah,
some supplements, and I would talk to your local, health provider there, just as far as removing those toxins, because at that
right.
young age, you just want to be careful
Are
with that.
there natural ways to do that to remove those toxins?
So I use a lot of times I'll use liquid bentonite clay, and it's a very porous clay. I also like zeolites, and zeolites come from volcanic ash, and they really trap a lot of those toxins and heavy metals. And it's very gentle, and you can use it even in babies. So
And what kind of practitioner would give a family advice about using these kinds of supplements?
You're going to look more towards a natural or holistic health practitioner, or a naturopath will be the ones that you'd want to look at in regards to that. There are some, if you have a natural grocers or a grocery store that's a little bit more holistic and whole foods, they generally will have somebody there, like at Sprouts, that can help you with some of the supplements. They are generally trained as far as nutritionists and holistic therapies as well, so they can assist you.
Well, and this is a very common problem. So I expect that they get a lot of questions about ear fluid with kids because there are a lot of parents that don't want to go the route with the ear tubes, or like you said, maybe it's unsuccessful because the ear fluid's too thick or the child's eardrum's not, in the right position. There's a lot of reasons that that's not the way to go. And a lot of parents get frustrated. I just want to take my kid to the doctor, get the ear tubes, and the situation's going to be gone. And the reality is that's a band-aid on top of the
Mhm.
problem. And especially if your kids had tubes after tubes after tubes after tubes, this is when you need to get back to these remedies that Alexi's
Right.
talking about, because like you said, it's a chronic condition, and it can come back in some kids way later past toddlerhood. Some people as adults can have chronic ear issues, and repeated ear fluid is permanently damaging to the
It
ear
does.
structures. They're super sensitive, aren't they?
They do. So the ear fluid will start to erode if it's chronic, the bones inside the ear. It also creates scar tissue on the eardrum. So ultimately, it does a history of childhood ear infections leads to what we call sensory neural or nerve hearing loss in later childhood, adulthood.
Right.
So having good ear health is really quite important.
Yeah, from very young to very old, because remember, hearing is one of those things that can degrade over time, like vision, right? And we want to make sure that you're maintaining that whole system from the cellular level up
Right.
so that you keep your kids' ear, nose, and throat as healthy as possible through this whole process, particularly if they're late talking. So,
And like you
wow.
said, Marcy, if they're late talking, most of the time it is due to fluid. So simple things that you can do to alleviate it at home is going to
Yeah.
impact them. School will be better. Energy levels, then you're going to be sad that they talk so much.
That's the
But that
problem
only
that
lasts
everybody
until
on my
they're
channel wants. Everybody
teenagers.
on my channel wants their kids to start talking too much. And so, we want that for you. We want to help you. That's why we're here. I was so happy to meet you in my little podcast group. I'm so glad that you're here to share with us. Now, I know that you've been looking through my resources. What kind of things on the Waves of Communication channel would you recommend to your clients who maybe have chronic ear fluid and are late talking?
Well, the most important thing I think that you do is that you put the power in the parent's hands instead of in the practitioner, because the parent is the best one to help the child and to take onus and be empowered with helping them to learn to talk.
Yeah.
You can go to a therapist all you want, but keep the power in yourself, and then your child's going to learn from you. It's going to be quicker and it's going to be longer lasting if you are the one who takes ownership and assists your child. So that's my favorite thing that you absolutely do. But your posts on Facebook are eye-opening. You provide so much value in tips and techniques for ways that people can communicate with their families better to improve overall communication. And I think that's lacking in a lot of other practices that deal with late talkers.
Aw,
So,
thank you. Well, that's what we try, right? And that's the whole point. And I know that you also are providing resources in Facebook and YouTube and other places. Tell us about how parents can learn more about how you work with people.
so I primarily look at labs now to see if there's any underlying issues. So if your child does have recurrent ear infections and they've had antibiotics, first of all, antibiotics can destroy the gut health in the body. And so although you get a short-term fix, it creates long-term problems, which makes the body more sensitive to allergens and digestion, which will lead to more ear infections down the road. So I look for those underlying issues in the labs and resolve those at the root. And then if you couple that with breathing and, flushes, you should be good to go.
Nice. Love it. Yeah. So if you're frustrated, if you're stuck, if your ENT visits haven't been working or, whatever, even the Flonase or whatever that you've been, getting your kid hooked on isn't working. Plus those antibiotics, they lose effect after a while. And again, it's just Band-Aids that you're putting on these symptoms instead of learning from them, using them and getting together. How can they contact you and find out more information? Tell us about your website.
Sure. So you can go to my website. It's www.elementsofwellness1.com. And there's a free link to a consult with me, no charge. Or you can reach out to me at alexi@elementsofwellness1.com. And I'm happy to help you with anything I can. So
great. And those links will be in the description of this video. So you can go down there below and click on them and contact Alexi. Dr. Alexi, thank you for all of this. I'm sure it was enlightening for a lot of parents. And, hopefully these valuable tips are things that you can start to do. Just start to look, do your own analysis, do your own intervention. You can start these things while you're waiting for doctor's appointments, if you feel like you can't get in, if it's the middle of the night, whatever, try doing the nose slosh thing and see if you can't get your kid cleared up so they can go back to sleep. Give it a try. Why not? It can't hurt you. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It was our pleasure. Bye for now, everybody. With a whole range of Waves of Communication resources, from free content to customized coaching, you now have access to everything you need to elevate spoken language to infinite success. You are welcome to get your journey started with my 11-week language facilitation journey to speech workbook. You can access this workbook and all of the language facilitation resources on my website, wavesofcommunication.com.